But we do get confused where we are at the moment because we're travelling into so many different places, following England, also Scotland around. We're going from south to north, trying to keep track of the games, as well as chatting to so many of the fans, as well as those, of course, taking part in this competition as well. So how inevitable mixing up some of those locations. Bit of a dreary day here in Frankfurt today. Pretty apt given the mood amongst some of the England fans. We were getting absolutely soaked as we were preparing to go live on the breakfast show this morning on Sky News, and now we are inside preparing to answer some of your key questions about just what went wrong with England. Before we begin, of course, they are still unbeaten. They beat Serbia in the first game 1-0. They drew 1-1 against Denmark last night. So it might seem gloomy, like the weather I'm looking outside at, but there is that glimmer of optimism still. But it just shows how much people do care about a tournament with England, that you have all these questions to answer. And as well, before getting into them, let's remember, while it's England's men trying to be European champions, the Lionesses do have the women's trophy won 2 years ago. So this is all largely about, of course, the issues with Gareth Southgate has with his group of players. So we'll get through some of these questions, also give a sense what it's like reporting on this tournament as well as we're getting through them. And to begin with the first question from Jackson, who sent it in: is everyone overreacting? England are historically late to the party and often, like this time, get through to the knockouts. Don't lose has been the instruction, and in my opinion, the correct one. First job done. Get through, the momentum will build. So, he mentions about getting through to the knockouts. That generally does happen with England. I was with them the last time they didn't. That was in 2014 at the World Cup in Brazil. And I can tell you, it was a pretty gloomy atmosphere in the camp. It was Roy Hodgson then, assisted by Gary Neville, who's not short of an opinion now, of course. That was completely miserable, failing to win a game there at all and going home early. So that's the recent negative low of a decade ago. And let's look at this one for England. The men have never won back-to-back games at the start of a European Championship. This was their 10th attempt. So history certainly has been consistent in that way. But this whole mission is about doing what they haven't done before by winning the Euros. So perhaps it's no good just to say that they're doing as they always have done, not win the opening games. And in fairness to Gareth Southgate, there is always Portugal to remember. 2016 in France at the Euros, there was so much negativity around their camp because they drew all 3 games in the group stage, didn't win a single one, went through with 3 points, the bare minimum in the expanded format since it went from 16 to 24 teams. And of course they went on to win the whole tournament, beating Wales in the semi-finals. And things were so fraught in their camp. I remember the whole fallout when Cristiano Ronaldo threw a microphone from a reporter on a match day into a lake, although we would never try to interview players when they're on their walk on a match day. We were with the Scotland players before their game the other night and we were just filming them, didn't speak to them. So that shows how fraught it can be, how it can all end up, and you can still win a trophy at the end of it all. We have a question that's come in from John T. It's all about Gareth Southgate. And he says, why does Gareth Southgate adopt this so-called safe negative strategy of playing and not allow players to express themselves as they do for their clubs? He goes on, it's not the players' fault. They play the way they are told by Southgate. He adopted the same negative style of playing at Middlesbrough. Now, it's interesting bringing up Middlesbrough because I was just checking the stats, and the youngest member of this England squad, Kobe Mainoo, was only 4 years old when Southgate was still in charge at Middlesbrough. He left in 2009 after being relegated with them, and that was still his last top management job apart from the England one, and it ended in 2009, 15 years ago. So it does show how something that's often held against Southgate, his lack of top-level manager experience, just being really, to some, in the right place when he got the England job. But also, let's remember, he got it in the fallout from Euro 2016. he initially didn't apply. He was under 21s manager. He thought it would come too soon when Hodgson left after the debacle of losing to Iceland in the last 16, the Euro 2016. We had the Sam Allardyce experiment, lasted one game, left in a storm of controversy over the undercover newspaper sting. And then Southgate got in as a caretaker and stayed on ever since then. Now, of course, he's been linked to other jobs since then, but has stayed loyal to England. England's loyal to him despite the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, when it looked like he potentially could leave after the quarter-final exit to France. But you get a sense that England are pretty happy with the consistency of knowing what they get with Southgate. It's that caution, perhaps, that doesn't go down too well with England fans. Not sort of that level of assurity. You know what you're going to get from him in press conferences. He can handle the tough questions, navigate things without really getting into any trouble and landing the FA in it. But it's about what he can get out of the players on the pitch. And Southgate has very little time with them through the year. They have this tournament camp. They were last together before this in March. The previous camps were in September and October. So it's really limited time to impose a vision, if there is one. And, you know, not everyone sees that there is a Southgate vision. He has talked about experimentation at this tournament, but is this the right time actually to be experimenting? He's experimenting with Trent Alexander-Arnold. We'll get into a bit more of that perhaps in a bit, putting him in midfield. But can you be bold when there is so little margin for error? And particularly in this group stage, it is just about getting out of it unscathed. Although let's remember, it is pretty hard not to get out of the group in this 2014 format since they expanded to 16. We only lose 8 teams out of the 24 going into the next round. Let's move on to another question from Steve T, as he calls himself. And what he says is, will us England fans ever realise that despite all the talent we have, we are nowhere near as good as we believe we are? Every 2 years we sing "It's Coming Home," despite the fact the side has done nothing to justify that confidence. Other nations are laughing at us. It was interesting at the stadium here in Frankfurt last night. There seemed a bit of sympathy from the Danish fans between the taunts of "Champions of Europe, you'll never sing that." Another reminder of how an unheralded team can win the Euros. Also see the Greek side of 2004 were reflecting on Portugal in 2016 when, even despite that fact they had Cristiano Ronaldo, still here of course, they weren't one of the top contenders. But we do often hear football's coming home being taunted back at England fans. So many countries have adopted it in their own language as well. Football kommt nach Haus, the German adaptation of it, used for many years, particularly actually after Euro 96 when we first heard Three Lions, because of course they went on to win the Euros there at Wembley. And I actually look at the football's coming home bravado a bit differently. I see it more as a song of sorrow, of the near misses, the unfulfilled potential, the years of hurt counter that's sort of ticked along to 58 for the men's team. And that is something that, you know, that is so often reminded of the team, and they really stopped updating the song, of course, after so many years. Baddiel, Skinner and the Lightning Seeds. There is, though, that sense. So far we've been with England here, also up in Gelsenkirchen in the north, that it does often sound like a sense of English entitlement, the football's coming home. It really does irritate people. I hear at the highest levels of FIFA that it's this sense of England owns football, the birthplace of football, and it can actually impact things when it comes to deciding who hosts things like World Cups, because it does feel like England believes that it should be ours. It is an English entitlement, so it's where the song doesn't go down too well, but it's a pretty good song and something striking. Didn't even attempt a song before this tournament. You can see why they didn't before Qatar, because there's so little time as a Winter World Cup. But what happened to the England song? Maybe something that will come back. It's so many of the old ones that we hear still being sung. I think you could probably say maybe even 1990, the John Barnes rap still the pick of the England songs for many along there. But this is more about, will England find their tune? Will they regain their rhythm here at this tournament? And for that, we have a question from David. Every tournament, the media hypes it up as England's best chance of winning since 1966, and also say how world-class all the players are, while the bookies say England are one of the favourites. Isn't it just a simple case the players aren't as good as everyone thinks? Interesting bringing up the bookies, obviously betting far wider in the news at the moment, but there can be a bit of home favouritism towards those odds from the British bookies, wanting to sort of price in the potential that there'll be a lot of home betting, and that leads to sort of shorter odds on England being classed amongst the favourites. Which of course they should be. They reached the last final, although it was at Wembley 3 years ago, losing, don't need to remind you, on penalties to Italy. Reached the semi-finals at the World Cup in 2018. Get on to should they have gone further in a moment, and only falling short against a pretty strong French side in 2022 when we were in Qatar. But in terms of the hype, certainly there's a lot of fan hype as well. You just have to go around Germany to sense that they believe it is certainly England's time. And so much for Southgate is about what he can do with this group of players. David's suggesting that they aren't as good as everyone thinks. You can have gifted players as Southgate does, but it's about gelling them into a squad. We've seen Chelsea, their £1 billion transfer spree in the last couple of years has yielded absolutely nothing. They've only gone and slid down the Premier League table, and that just shows what is required of Southgate. He's certainly not short of options, but he has to find a way of balancing them and creating a team out of all these various components. And he certainly has the talent. Just look at the breadth. Now, in the past, we've talked about England players not getting experience beyond English shores, not making it on the continent, not perhaps having the impact. But that's certainly something we have seen in the last year. Harry Kane at Bayern Munich in his first season being so impressive. Just looking at the stats as I try and call them up rapidly. He's contributed 44 goals, set up another 12 in his 45 games at Bayern. Perhaps dwell on that rather than the lack of silverware in this really unusual season here with Bayer Leverkusen winning the title. Go across to Spain, look at Jude Bellingham and the impact he's made in the toughest of environments. He's provided 23 goals and 10 assists in his first 42 games at Real Madrid, winning La Liga, winning the Champions League with them as well. And he's not even an out-and-out striker playing in midfield. So that's who he's got. Southgate's also got the current young player of the year in the Premier League, Phil Foden, having won a fourth consecutive title at Manchester City. He certainly was in a squad, a team that's won the four consecutive titles. Only really had the key playing time in recent years. He's been blended into that squad by Pep Guardiola, really giving him time to develop, which perhaps brings us neatly onto Gareth Southgate's midfield, because we've got a question from only someone calling themselves HP123 that's come in, which is, how can we organise this midfield to get the best out of our key players? And, we're looking at perhaps the limited impact that midfield has had. Do you know, over the years, it's often been the players who aren't at the tournament, whose stature has grown while they haven't been part of it. I think all the years that, Jack Wilshere either was injured or didn't quite make the squad, it'd often be talked about as, if only we had Jack Wilshere, and it only seemed to sort of raise his potential. Now, though, looking particularly at this one, back to the present, surely Trent Alexander, though, won't be seen in this midfield again at the Euros. I mentioned the experimentation that Gareth Southgate has tried. It hasn't worked out. We see what an impact he makes right back for Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp, who's obviously now departed. There has been a sight of him in midfield at times, but it certainly isn't performing at this tournament. And, Kobe Mainoo, he's had a real breakthrough season at Manchester United. Will perhaps we see him slot in alongside Declan Rice after, impressing so much in what has been a difficult season at Manchester United? The fact you can impress like that when it has been such a difficult time, while still only 19, shows perhaps the stature that he's got to be able to perform at the highest level at a tournament. Could we see Gareth Southgate veer from the 4-2-3-1 formation? Is this the time for a 4-3-3? An opening perhaps for Conor Gallagher, maybe? You know, he could be in a midfield trio with Declan Rice and Jude Bellingham. So there are the options, and there is time perhaps for Gareth Southgate to look at it as well. We're here on Friday. The next game isn't until Tuesday against Slovenia. And perhaps it's worth just remembering what the permutations are now for England. They beat Serbia. They have got this point from Denmark. 4 points in this 2014 tournament has always been enough to get through. What it's all about now is, will they go through as group winners, or will they fall short? And there's a potential, if they don't win the group, that they could face Germany, the host here, in the next round if they are runners-up in their group. Then you get into permutations of finishing third, and you do get 4 of the best third-place teams all going through. So that is still the option. You can go through with 3 points, but England could be left waiting a couple of days even to work out who they are facing and their path then into the last 16. So, keeping going through your questions, and we now have from Linda Ralph. Did Gareth Southgate actually speak to the team at half-time? If so, why did things not change? And did the players just not listen? If he didn't talk to them, why not? I know we're not all experts, but the pundits were seeing what was wrong as well as the fans. It just doesn't make sense. Yeah, perhaps maybe Gareth Southgate should be tuning into the half-time pundits, getting a brief from the TV and radio experts there, but certainly Gareth Southgate will know what's best. But it was clear some of the conclusions being drawn pretty quickly. We didn't used to actually hear from the manager on TV at half-time of major tournaments, but perhaps their commitments are so vast now, post-match as well as between matches, that one extra interview is just too much from them. But it's also something often asked of them post-match. What did you say to the players at half-time? It's often a crux of something for us to talk about as well, to get a sense of the dressing room. It wasn't asked about that as far as I know, but we did get an indication from Kane what was being said in that dressing room, because he said that they addressed how the Danish players were dropping deeper, and then the England players were left not too sure how to apply the pressure. They almost couldn't figure out how to adopt a plan B, how to impose themselves on this game, a game that they were in control of until the point that Kane did score. And let's just remember that it wasn't all about Kane, it was about Kyle Walker's brilliance down the right that helped to create that opening. The ball sort of found its way through to Kane, who did manage to apply that finishing touch. But we saw they didn't take control. We've seen it before. We saw it in the semi-finals. I was there in Moscow in 2018 against Croatia. They had the early goal. But what did they do from it? Didn't build on it. Instead, Croatia were able to sort of regain the control of that game and ultimately reach the final. Fast forward to Wembley when I was there in 2021 at the final against Italy. Again, it was an early goal in that final for England, and instead it was Italy that just went and took control. Luke Shaw, it was after 2 minutes, I was just checking, it was so soon. We thought they were going to go flying from that point, and they were still absolutely dominating until the pain of penalties. But in terms of this game, what Kane was saying was there was an attempt then by him and Bellingham to try and get in front of the Danish midfield, but they just couldn't find that goal threat. And then, of course, we had the surprising sight of Kane being hooked with more than 20 minutes to go. It's something we're rarely used to seeing at all, with Kane as captain, with Southgate deciding actually it's time for a plan B. There was quite an impact then initially from Ollie Watkins. We did see him stretch the defence and create an opening, but it just wasn't sustained at all here in Frankfurt. Does bring us on to another question that's come in. This is about Kane. Where was Kane's leadership on the field what was up with Jude Bellingham last night. He seemed so frustrated, unable to brush off decisions and tackles that didn't go his way. He lost the ball far too often. He's young, yes, but that frustration wasn't addressed by the captain at all. So really a sense of, could Kane have helped to guide Bellingham a bit more on this stage? Bellingham actually has started to build up tournament experience. This is, it is his third. He is starting to really be part of this squad, and yet he's still only 20. And he can be fatigued. It can be seen as an excuse. Is being tired an excuse when all these players have just come off the back of largely long European seasons? But perhaps Bellingham more so, because at 20 he's being played so much. This, it's been calculated, was his 103rd match in 2 seasons. That goes back to his time here in Germany at Borussia Dortmund. And he is only 20, and perhaps we've seen the impact of that towards the end of what has been a stunning first season at Real Madrid, but he only scored in 3 of his last 13 games of the season for them. So that, perhaps was showing a trend going into this tournament. Maybe he should be rested against Slovenia, knowing that effectively qualification is secure. He might be needed in the latter stages to make more of an impact, and perhaps a bit of a break is necessary, because reaching the Champions League final meant his season went right the way through to the end. He couldn't even have a break really before linking up with the England squad. Let's go on to another question, should we? We just mentioned Luke Shaw scoring in that Euros final in 2021. Here's a question. England's left side problem is a real problem, asked Jules. As our only left footer, how far away is Shaw from returning? Well, Gareth Southgate had hoped to have Luke Shaw available in the group stage, but the prognosis has been increasingly negative. Perhaps it's now looking like he could make it into the knockout phase. Certainly would it have proved a gamble if he doesn't make it. He hasn't managed to feature for Manchester United since February, so there were questions whether he would even make this squad. We had Erik ten Hag, the Manchester United manager, on television the other day saying he wouldn't make the group stage at all. He managed to predict it completely first. But yeah, was it right to bring Luke Shaw? He's not even managed to really train with the team. This hamstring injury is still a problem. Even just now, just trying to check out, do we have any update today? We had a sense from the England camp just now, checking it. 10 players were out training today, with all those who played against Denmark working indoors, plus Luke Shaw. So that shows he's not fit enough to be training on the grass yet with the players who didn't feature last night here in Frankfurt. He's still doing indoor work, and now we are counting down to that final game. So that gamble, bringing Luke Shaw, although since they expanded squad size from 23 to 26, it does give a slight bit more flexibility to include a player who is injured here for the tournament. So, it's also a reminder of the fact he didn't bring Ben Chilwell, who has been out injured, and perhaps will provide another option there. On the left, he only managed 13 Premier League appearances last season. He had hamstring and knee injuries, but we had from Mauricio Pochettino, when he was still Chelsea manager, that he thought Chilwell could make these Euros. Obviously, Gareth Southgate taking a different view. That would certainly seem so, but you do get a sense of how Luke Shaw has been missed. So, just checking in on another question now as we're sort of just going through these. We have one from a person calling themselves a goals fan. There we go, just calling this one up now. These players play an exciting, fast-pressing game every week in the Premier League. For England, it is dull and defensive with the keeper getting more touches than the attackers. Surely this is down to the instructions and the tactics of the manager. Why can't Gareth Southgate get the best out of the players at the tournament? It keeps on coming down to this, and that was certainly the sense talking to the fans afterwards, leaving the stadium. They do blame Gareth Southgate for this, and addressing the fast-pressing game we see in the Premier League. Maybe that is the point. We are here at the end of a intensive Premier League season. Premier League boasts about being the most competitive league around the world, certainly the most lucrative. maybe that's what takes it out of some of these players, the fact it is so intense in that battle for the title, the European places, just to stay in the league, that it can be pretty hard. But I think so much comes down to Gareth Southgate, and he's got the extensions. He stays on after the World Cup in Qatar. Perhaps some calls for him to go. Really not though pretty extensive in the media. There are very few dissenting media voices, and that might bring us on to who would have replaced him though in 2022, and that's why perhaps stability was what was favoured by the FA. And even now, as they look at potential options, would they bring in another big foreign name? There are sort of many managers you think of who are sort of still who are available without clubs. Jurgen Klopp, although I get a sense he would want a break. Someone like I don't know, Thomas Tuchel perhaps. And then there are the English options as well that are there. There's always a sense, Graham Potter, is he holding on, not taking another club job, because this England job could become available after the Euros. Gareth Southgate has indicated it could be his last tournament, saying really, well, for every manager here, it could be the end. But always you get a sense in the FA that they would keep him on until 2026, favouring what they know. But should they be more ruthless, many asking, if he doesn't deliver a trophy, is it time to move on? That sense, again, perhaps it comes to the entitlement that England should be winning the trophy. But now here in Frankfurt for us, we're still digesting the fallout from the game last night, looking ahead to Slovenia, looking ahead of those options. We're also looking at Scotland too, because they, of course, can make it still into the last 16 after that valuable point against Switzerland. And for us, we don't expect to be hearing from any of the England players today. They don't do any media the day after the match. Instead, it's all about the analysis and your questions as well, which we've had a great time answering here today. Great to hear what you get to think about the team, because this is certainly the moment when the nation comes together watching the tournament, and we'll keep following it on Sky News, including talking to as many fans as possible out here in Germany when we go through the streets. But thank you for all your questions this afternoon, live on this Sky News special online. Thank you for following and listening to all my rambling through your answers. Have a good day.